Hello, everyone. We're going to start. I think everyone's fashionably late who's going to be here. So, if you haven't been here before, my name is Joshua New. I'm with the Center for Data Innovation. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy think tank focusing on issues of data, technology, public policy, and the whole intersection of that. Open data is something we care a lot about, so we're very excited to have I believe this is our fifth monthly meeting, with the Census Bureau. So before I introduce them, I just want to poll the audience. Who here is from the public sector? Okay, private sector, contractor, academia? No one? Anyone I missed? Journalists? Cool. Is there anything in between? I think I covered everything.
International development.
International development. Perfect. Thank you so much from the World Bank. A quick scheduling. Our next meetup is tentatively scheduled for April 23rd. It will either be the Foreign Assistance Department at the State Department or Smithsonian and some federal library sciences agencies. We're still locking that down. But again, please, we're always looking for connections within federal agencies or state agencies, open data people. If you know anyone, I promise I'll hound them down myself. You guys don't have to be involved. But we're always looking for people to join us. So we're very excited today to have Jeff Meisel, I think I'm pronouncing that right. He's a Presidential Innovation Fellow at the Census. Logan Powell, he leads user research efforts at the Census. He's responsible for the National Day of Civic Hacking.
Not responsible.
Yeah, I was told responsible. Well, thank you, Alice. He was involved. And we also have Libby.
Lily Beth.
Sorry?
Lily?
Sorry, I can't even read my own handwriting. What's your last name?
Genghis.
Lily Beth Genghis. She's an innovation strategist at Booz Allen working at the Census. So we're going to have some slides. We're going to have about half an hour presentation, and then we'll do some audience question and answer. Relatively informal. You don't have to stick to timelines, and feel free to stick around afterwards if you want to talk. Some of you, I think I hounded in the elevator that I may want to talk to you later to recruit some of your agency people here. But again, feel free. Water's up here, up back. If you're missing anything, let me know. And take it away, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Okay, so my name is Logan. Thank you all for coming. I'm glad that you're all interested in the Census Bureau because sometimes it feels like it's somewhat of a boring topic, but I'm glad that we have people who find data interesting, and that's, I guess, why we're all here to talk about the interesting parts of census data. And tonight we're going to be focusing a little bit on how the Census Bureau, spearheaded by Jeff, we're trying to make it more accessible. Our data is more accessible. Because we think data is sexy, but it's right now kind of cumbersome to deal with in terms of the formats that we currently publish them in, sometimes locked up in PDFs, and even our API could use some love. So what we're working on currently is engaging with our customers to find out how we can improve that customer experience. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. We've got a lot of good input from a lot of different types of stakeholders. My specific stakeholder of interest is developers, hackers. So I got a lot of hackathons. I conducted hackathons. National Day of Civic Hacking is something that I worked in very close collaboration with NASA to lead up, and what ended up being a very, very large, the largest government, private partner, public-private hackathon in history, and still is every year since then. It was a couple of years ago. So this next, I'll be talking a little bit about that. But to get us started, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory of a recent salient, in my mind, hackathon that we went to. Jeff and I were in Seattle a month ago with Zillow and did a Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we participated in this weekend-long hackathon. It was incredibly fun. There was about 400 people there, 40 teams. Zillow was kind enough to offer up pony up $16,000 in prizes and a good panel of judges, and they partnered with the University of Washington. It was a fun time. One thing I did was that after the event, I hunted down, and basically cornered all the people who worked on our using our data, worked on using our API, and I interviewed them and found out what they liked, what they didn't like, what were things that we could improve upon. So here are a couple of some of the quotes that we pulled from those interviews, just to kind of give you an example of some of the feedback that we get about our API. sometimes it's positive. Many times it's difficult for people to get to the positive stuff because of the usability of the API. So much of that difficulty lies in the fact that not every developer is a cartographer, and most data scientists, well, I should say, most of the ones that I've worked with aren't cartographers, and we kind of default to expecting that they are that way because it's very much entrenched in our culture at the Census Bureau. Cartography and geography, of course, every single data point within the Census Bureau is related to some geography, and mostly in aggregate geography if we're talking about publicly available data because of the disclosure rules, right? We need to protect people's privacy and confidentiality, so we aggregate that. So we anonymize, in order to anonymize the data, the larger the sample, the higher the resolution, because we can sort of we can basically have a very high density population in a smaller area to say that basically you don't know who exactly in there is this specific demographic. But dealing with our API, these developers give us positive and sometimes very constructive, even though sometimes critical, but constructive feedback. And so what we do is we try to synthesize that. We ask for recommendations. Sometimes we get really great ones. For example, like this last slide here, at the bottom we have some recommendations about how we can make it easier for people to query our API by using lat longs. Right now we require people to actually send in a FIPS code. How many people know what a FIPS code is? 2 people, 3 people. Anybody else? 3 people? The 3 people know what the FIPS code are, and that's typical. I mean, even if you do know what a FIPS code is, it's a sort of a challenge to use it because you have to find a translator, usually, if you want to match it up with another data set. Find a translation of like a lat long or some other shape into a FIPS code, and then you can call our API. So translating like the common conventional constructs that developers have of data or of geography into Census's construct is one of the issues. And then once they get that, once they figure out how to do that translation, then they get this like giant dump of lat long coordinates, and they don't really know how to deal with that. They're not even prepared to understand like that's aggregate data. That's not a point. That's not you're not getting a location. You're getting like an area. And how do I deal with that? So this was a really great recommendation made from one of the developers at Nokia Maps. He said, "Why doesn't the API just dump the data out in a construct that matches up with openly or freely or open source mapping applications like Leaflet or Google Maps or Nokia Maps in his case? Why is this so difficult considering that that's typically the use case?" So that's an example of something that we're trying to tackle here with what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the CitySDK, which is the title slide, Jeff is going to dig more into that. We're going to be developing a software development kit, SDK, so that we can abstract away some of that complexity, led by Jeff, and we're going to sort of package that into a JavaScript library that basically does all that stuff for you. It simplifies that so that you basically can give it some lat longs, you make some kind of variable calls, and then you end up with data. You don't have to worry about all the complexity that we were talking about earlier. We're going to be launching that CitySDK at the National Day of Civic Hacking this year, and that's happening on June 6th. That's going to be happening all around the country. Actually, I think it's actually international this year. Last year was like 130 cities. I can't remember. There's 12,000 developers involved in that. So this year we're hoping for a similarly large event, and we're going to be doing something special around this area, but also in some other areas, other cities in the United States. So with that, Jeff.
Cool. So again, I'm Jeff Meisel, and I'm really excited to present to you this evening and talk about open data. Essentially, the problem we're trying to solve with our CitySDK is we want to take kind of the current state today, which is a number of disaggregated data sources from silos, and we want to really understand what's the process a developer goes through to take those data sets in the context of a community, in the context of a city, and combine federal with state with local data to solve the problem. And so we want to do that with a software development kit that you can think of as a cookbook of recipes that will provide some functions, some crosswalks, etc., as well as just some technical guides to enable more productivity from the developer standpoint. We really like the CitySDK concept from our friends over in the EU who developed a project based on some EU funding. And so what they looked at was a couple key sectors. They looked at tourism, for example. They also adopted the Open 311 API as well. And then a couple cities got behind it and said, hey, if we can get more best practices with using data it'll create scale for developers and entrepreneurs. Because then if you imagine you're an app developer, you create one app with open data, it works in Helsinki, and that same app could potentially work in Barcelona or another city. And so this actually is not only a productivity and a usability improvement, it creates scale for entrepreneurs and developers who can build a product and hopefully drive a business model or economic growth with open data from the government, which is awesome, right? Because as taxpayers, we're paying for that data already. A couple key things that are core to this project. So first, the city is at the core. And so we wanted to figure out what is kind of the next step of open data at the census. So we've got a public API, we have some incredible data, but we need to understand how that data is getting used in the developer community. And so we try to take our best guess at a lot of the ecosystem players that really care about and can identify with problems within their community. And so if you think of the city at the core, there's multiple entities that are providing data sets, and from those data sets are helping inform decisions within that community.
Hi, I don't interrupt. We just got a women's bathroom key, so I apologize. It was missing earlier, but if anyone needs to go, it's right on the table.
That's a great example of innovation, Josh.
Thank you.
So, as I was mentioning, so there's agencies that are impacting the community, but those data sets don't always play nicely together. In addition, there's innovation centers. So, of course, 1776 here in DC, a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of folks are looking at technology. For example, there's a local startup there that's working on a transportation application, which could potentially use open data. We have folks like Census. We have a technology called our Data Web, which is really our internal dissemination platform, of course, with data.gov. And then we have industry, right? And so if we can help kind of leverage civic day of hacking and go to where the customers are, in effect, we can get these ecosystem players to come together and try to solve some of the problems that the communities are facing. And so a great example of that was what Logan mentioned at Zillow. We had SMEs, so we had these subject matter experts on the ground who really understood in depth the housing problems of the community. And then we had technical folks at HUD and Census and others that could then kind of play matchmaker and tap into the passion of that developer community to then solve those problems. So it helps kind of build that linkage. And so that's kind of the key thing with the CityK is kind of enabling that ecosystem that we believe would be an effective way to do so. Now, what's actually in the product? So in essence, we want to make census data more consumable. So that's kind of our first objective, is make our public API easier to use. And by doing so, we want to help our end users build transformative products at the city level by making data more interoperable between federal, state, and local data. So we're going to use our data sets as a foundation and then partner with a few agencies to start with, such as HUD, such as Department of Interior, to kind of go deeper on those vertical use cases. We have an architecture here which is hard to see, but essentially what this is explaining is we have these multiple data sets. Our SDK will provide functions in a wrapper layer sense. The stack that we're starting out with is JavaScript and HTML5 and open source tools. And then we want to go very vertical with a couple examples that show the potential of this type of concept. And we want the community to participate and help inform our strategy for this. So this is kind of our first pass that we're aiming for the beta. We'll have this released in May, and then at events like Civic Day of Hacking, the developers can kind of take this and go very, very deep on a couple opportunities within their community. In terms of the project, so this was kind of another key tenet of this whole idea is we wanted to execute in an agile fashion. We wanted to be open source, and we wanted to be community led. So those are kind of the three things. We have an internal team at Census who, myself included, along with Logan, Lily, and our dev folks, we're executing on a 2-week sprint cycle where we are managing our entire backlog for the project in GitHub. So what's really cool is, folks in the community that want to participate and say, hey, you know what, this is really hard, I'm stuck here. You can actually go to the issue tracker on GitHub, submit a user story, and then we'll consider that in our next sprint, right? So you can basically add to our backlog in real time, and so we're really kind of crowdsourcing the challenges that our users are currently facing with open data. We'll develop along that sprint cycle. We'll do kind of a brief kind of QA just to make sure that the code that we're releasing is valid. And that allows us to meet kind of our IT requirements, and because sometimes we're touching our back-end infrastructure. And then from there, we go ahead and release it and then begin our next sprint cycle. We will have a prototype at the end of each sprint. So we have beta testers already lined up that are going to kick the tires on the product and make sure that it's kind of meeting their needs. So one really cool app is called HeatSeek from NYC that came out of the Big Apps Challenge. They have a need where they want to take 311 data related to basically the heating issues that in their community. Sometimes landlords are not meeting the requirements to heat the property and the building up to code for the tenants. And so there's an app that won the Big Apps Challenge called HeatSeek. They want to take that and use the CitySDK to kind of further that, and then potentially take that to more communities. So they're one of our beta testers. So this is live on GitHub. You can go check it out. And this is kind of the first way that you can engage with this project, is go submit user stories, look at our backlog, and then we also have kind of a project overview on the site. So all of this is leading to a national challenge where we hope to roll it out. So I'll let Lily explain what that's going to look like.
Sure. Hi, my name's Lily Beth Yankas. Hopefully you guys can see me, I'm a little short. But I'm from Booz Allen. I'm part of the innovation strategy and crowdsourcing team. And if that wasn't enough really cool stuff that the census is doing that maybe folks have no idea that's going on, but now you know, then another flavor that we're adding to this is creating a national challenge. So it's more of the concept of we're not just going to build it and hope people come. We're actually going to be very proactive in making sure that the community stays involved and is actually part of it and owns it. So a way that we're going to actually do that is launching a national challenge. But in between, we're also going to be looking for smaller testing, like Jeff mentioned, little beta testing. We're going to have other events as a precursor to help us learn and also validate and be a very agile on how we're developing, how we're getting some of the feedback. And eventually also, again, get the community to own it, because at the end of the day, this is for you guys who are part of this community to really participate. But for some of the ones that are not the folks here, have you guys ever participated in a challenge? Open data challenges? Yes? Have you guys ever done any type of crowdsourcing? Yeah? Okay, great. So the crowdsourcing concept is pretty simple, right? We want to be able to leverage the minds of all the really, really brilliant people across different areas and be able to get connected through using technology and platforms. So what we're able to do is really, in three main phases, be able to get the ideas, as many as possible, so then that we're able to go through them, validate them, and see which ones of those are meeting some of the criteria, and eventually get to the selections that we want and be able to ultimately implement it. And some of the key areas there are really to just be able to build some of the really groundbreaking solutions to some degree, and I'll give you guys an example of what that means. For example, have you guys heard of, remember the Google experiment where there was a balloon that was traveling around the world? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Well, did you know the DARPA in itself actually ran a challenge because they wanted to learn about, just experiment, how can you actually collect data from the internet, and what would that look like when you couple it with social media? What would that be? They actually came up with the original concept of trying to have tracking the balloon, and actually Google is now using that type of technology, and so some other card manufacturers. Another example as well from some of the agencies that we have here, some of them are really, they want to raise awareness about specific causes. So for example, SAMCEL wanted to raise awareness about suicide prevention, and they wanted to find a way to increase more of the beneficiaries using the lifelines and using the data center. So they ran a challenge for the community to be able to come up with a mobile app that would be able to engage the community, but also be able to provide real-time access to these services. They had over 100 types of submissions. Another example, really, it's organizations coming together. For example, we had the EPA that came together with an agency to be able to identify if there's a correlation between knowing how healthy, sorry, let me track back. They wanted to find a correlation between if you know if your health can improve if you have more access to data such as pollutants. So they created a challenge to engage the community and come up with solutions of how people can identify some real-time data conditions about different types of pollutants and how it is affecting their health. And they actually got about 500 plus submissions. One of the submissions that was selected created a portable wearable real-time product that people can wear. And as you're walking around, it's able to be able to grab some of the data and actually tell you how the pollutants are really affecting your health, which is pretty interesting. Other examples are a little bit different is how NYC, the Economic Development Corporation, and the Health 2.0 wanted to find a way to bring different stakeholders like industry, entrepreneurs, and other agencies together and work together, and they come up with the idea of creating sort of like an incubator, and they were able to come up with a challenge that attracted 11 future TV entrepreneurs. And one of the products that actually came out of that collaborative was Vision Labs, which is if you have a smartphone, you take a picture of your eye, in a few seconds you basically have a eye prescription that you're ready to take. So I'll stop there for as far as examples, because I want to before you guys can go to challenge.gov to be able to find out more some of these challenges as well. But what's really interesting and why I'm actually really excited to be here, and it's really exciting to be part of this team with the census, is that the census is going to take some of the examples that we saw, but do something even way more different. And exactly what we're going to do, you guys will find out. Civic Hack Day when we'll launch the actual challenge, so keep your eye out for that. But at the end of the day, we want you guys to also be part of this community. And I'll hand it over to Jeff to talk about how we're engaging the rest of the civic leaders.
So we have a number of folks, some of them are power users, some of them are innovators at the community level, and folks with other agencies, and we would invite any one of you all to be a part of our Civic Leaders meetup. It's a group similar to this where it's open to the public, anyone can participate, but it's folks that are really passionate about this idea of open data at the city level. We have some fantastic folks that are helping us out that aren't on this slide, such as Rebecca Williams from data.gov, who is really kind of helping us ideate on the strategy. So again, this is open to all of us, but our kind of key call to action is we want to enlist your help, and really we envision this being driven by the community. We feel like census can play a role, but ultimately, we all live in cities, we all live in communities, and we can all tap into kind of the passion within those respective communities. So that's really all we had in terms of slide content. And now if my co-presenters want to come up, we can do maybe a bit of Q&A, Josh?
Sure. If you guys want to take a seat, I just want to. So that meetup group, if you want to send that to me, I can push it out to our group so you guys can all have access to it. Yeah.
You bet.
Sure. And also, I meant to say at the beginning, but I forgot. The Center for Data Innovation just put out a report on open data in the G8. There's the G8 Open Data Charter that was signed on to in 2013, back when it was the G8 before Russia left. But we still ranked Russia, and they came in last, surprisingly. But that report came out yesterday. Very kind of comprehensive analysis of the U.S., the U.K., Canada. The U.K. won, U.S. and Canada were in second place. But that's on our website if you want to check it out. So yeah, Q&A, we have plenty of time. Very informal, just whoever, if you guys want to direct it. I can pass around the microphone, people can't hear, but I haven't normally had a problem with that. So.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
You mentioned something about Europe did something similar that inspired you. Could you tell me what that is that inspired you specifically, please? And I would also be curious to know if there are other parts of the world where similar projects are going on.
Oh, and sorry, just say your name and organization before your question as well, so we know.
Daniel Dard, Johns Hopkins University.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think what really inspired us was we felt that was more of a user-centered design approach to understanding how users actually interact with the data, because it's one thing to have an API and get your open data out there, but to kind of go a step further and kind of form that community, which we had kind of the ecosystem slide before. We thought they kind of nailed that idea. Their approach, from my understanding, was a bit more on building out some key standards, and we're not quite there yet to where that makes sense. So we want to kind of get the ball rolling and get a discussion and get some engagement. But it was really kind of like ecosystem with the city at the core, and trying to kind of create scale so the developer could actually start a business with open data. We felt that was really inspired, and so we've had some calls with the folks. We sent over a teammate to kind of the global conference that was, I think, in Barcelona in the November timeframe. So.
Can you just walk us through what a developer would do when they heard about this? Like, would they have a problem in mind? Someone said try to solve this. Where would they get the data? How would they test it? How do they know what the problem is in the
Yeah, you want to take that, or you want to?
I can, if you want. I mean, so we're basically, you mean the actual event or what they would do with this tool? Or
What
what
an
this
individual would come up and do with what you're proposing.
So-
They interact with it.
So on the actual day of the event, we're hoping that people are going to make this their own. So I've mentioned this before, but someone said, I think the greatest analogy I've heard for census data is that it's the mirepoix of data, which is, I don't know if anybody's familiar with, if anybody speaks French, it's taken me a couple times to remember actually that word, but essentially it's a bunch of chopped up celery, onions, and carrots that you can basically throw into everything. So census data is very easily matched up or mash-upable or generically applicable to any problem because it's so, well, much of it's very high resolution geographically. And it is snapshot data. It's not sort of continuous or real-time in any sense, but it's very high resolution. So that having been said, it could be used for many, many different purposes. We're not exactly sure what, but we want to enable as many different applications as possible. So we try to guide that conversation. We try to inspire some ideas, but we're not locking people down by any sense. We're, like as Jeff had mentioned, we open our issues on our GitHub to any users' use cases. So there's the heat, the heating example. There's also, for example, I don't know, I want to know what the crime rate is per capita in my block. So you use the census data for population, or if you want to look at demographics in crime, or if you want to look at demographics in 311 data, or something like that. So there's all different types of ways that you can use census geographies and data therein to filter other data. So on the day of the event, we want people to mash our data up with their own data, or use our geographies to filter their own data, to find insights therein. But also we want to create a tool that enables well, that's much easier than it currently is. So we want to test, there are like two hypotheses. One is that people will find it very valuable to be able to use census data in conjunction and in concert with their own data, but also that this tool is actually going to make it easier. So we'll prove that if we get adoption, and hopefully we will. So we're going to try to promote it with our limited bandwidth, but so that's kind of our goals.
Also, another goal is to be able to have everyday people be able to take some of this data and actually be able to also create some kind of visualizations. So currently, for example, like the New York Times has a 40-person team to be able to come up with some really awesome visualizations they can interact with. But nobody has that budget, nobody has that amount of effort. And what we're trying to do is kind of empower the rest of the interested community who wants to be able to use and gain more value and see what some of these correlations that maybe before were not visible. We want to encourage that, and in order to be able to provide that type of functionality, there's a lot of groundwork that we're building up as we're going. So as far as some of the specific use problems, that's kind of why we're here. We wanted to be able to collect some specific, pain points that we're having. That's why we have a beta testers. That's why we have the community to be able to collect it and be able to identify it. Specifically for the challenge, there's going to be a prize money. So if people want to win some stuff, there's natural incentives, and we'll have specific sectors that to try to encourage and kind of bound it a little bit more, such as like housing. It could be kind of like employment data, like jobs data or environment data, etc. But we want to be able to, for that segment, leave it a little bit more open. And the goal that we have with some of these smaller precursor events is to, one, get out there, let people know what we're working on, and then also actually help. If you have a specific problem that you have or idea, help them actually walk through it and see what it feels like, and then eventually be able to open a larger challenge.
Yeah, I think those were both great answers. I think what I would add to that in kind of very tactical terms is we're now on GitHub, which we weren't before. So it's gonna, and with our technical guides, and we hope to have interactive documentation as well. You can envision a developer, whether they're at a hackathon or part of the challenge, or just separate from that, going and having some really compelling examples that they can fork on GitHub and say, oh wow, this is how I can use census with D3, or here's how I can actually take a census geography layer and put that in Leaflet, which wasn't easy to do before. And so those are some of the shortcuts and hopefully the productivity kind of pathways or recipes that we want to provide.
Question there.
Why don't you go first? Yeah.
So from a technology My name is Anthony Clark. I'm with the SEC. From a technology management and administrative standpoint, what are some challenges you guys have faced implementing this project, and what have you learned by addressing those challenges?
I would start by, so I guess, could you repeat the question? And I want to make sure I hit all the points.
Administrative.
From an administrative policy and technology perspective, what challenges have you guys faced, and what have you learned from those challenges?
Yeah, I would say from an administrative standpoint, our director and our leadership has been very supportive in improving our data dissemination efforts. I feel like they've done a great job in the past few years overall in trying to get data out there and really understanding our users. And I think this is kind of a continuation of that. So I think administration is very supportive, which we're lucky to have that. I think there's certainly been some technology barriers. And so just at the Department of Commerce level, getting approval to use GitHub. I also work at 18F, so I'm kind of one foot in 18F, one foot in Census. So that's allowed me to help us get GitHub up and going a little bit quicker, just from a policy standpoint, I guess, or technology standpoint. And then I think from an engagement perspective, trying to figure out how we can, certainly we have important rules like PRA and FACA, and trying to figure out how can we really engage users in an effective way that still complies with all our necessary rules. And so executing this project in as transparent way as possible, allowing anyone to participate and help kind of guide us is new for us. And so that's been just something we've had to kind of try to put in place and take best practices that we've learned from kind of colleagues and peers in government.
I'm going to supplement that real quick with PRA stands for Paperwork Reduction Act, and in government that essentially means that it's difficult for us to ask our customers to give us information. We have to, of course, the Census Bureau, any survey-taking agency or government entity has to get a Paperwork Reduction Act clearance from Office of Management and Budget, and that takes them quite a long time, especially if you're going to ask every household in the United States something. But even for small sample, like if I want to ask any more than 9 people the same question, I have to get that cleared. So there's a shift though. There's a title shift right now. Very much in gratitude to the Obama administration in this in terms of openness and transparency, trying to reduce the burden of that clearance process. So there's a generic clearance, we're trying to expedite that so that we can get specifically for customer questions. So that's a big policy thing, it's Paperwork Reduction Act. So if you can make a case for that, if you can help us advocate for easier access to asking our customers things, that's something that we constantly ask for. Another thing is, in terms of the technology side, to also supplement what Jeff said, our API at the Census Bureau is rather young. I mean, it's like 3 years old, which is older than many other agencies' APIs. But it's somewhat like treated right now as somewhat of a kind of a commodity channel, right? So there's FTP, there are PDFs, and then there's the API. It's just another channel for data, and it doesn't have a whole lot of resources wrapped around it. Their primary priority, and understandably so, is to get more data into the API. Whereas our priority is to get that API to be more pleasant experience to use for developers. So lowering the sort of usability. There's accessibility in general, but then we think part of that accessibility is usability. So that's the technological issues, and also that our department is not the same department that owns the API. Like the communications and the web department is over here in a completely different directorate than the people who own the actual implementation. So that's sometimes bridging that gap is a challenge, but everybody's conducive to the conversation. So that's we're lucky.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about it is it does present an opportunity for us who, Logan, myself, and Lily, our backgrounds are working with developers and the like, so we're able to continue to build awareness internally of why the API is so important, and it like Logan said, the conversations are great because we're able to further show the value of census data to other groups within the organization that are producing that data, and so we think this project is enabling a lot of really good conversations internally on a new type of user, basically.
So I'll stand up. My name's Bernadette Highland, and I work in the field of open data and open data standards for many years. Have been working with Ethan and the EPA for a number of years, and they have great data. EPA, like Census, has a lot of really great data that people are very interested in the environment, facilities, chemicals, etc. But we've been really stymied because I would say we really don't have that level of director support. What's the name of the director you're referring to?
John Thompson?
And Nancy Protok.
Right, so I think it may be changing a little bit now. We also had some issues with an older information security officer who's no longer there and was very much a need to know rather than a need to share kind of guy. So things are, I think, looking a bit brighter. But can you go into a little bit more detail about, like, do you guys talk to the director? Lily talks to the director?
No.
Oh.
Jeff talks to the director? Lily, like,
But for example, for example, I mean, with Booz Allen, I'm helping, I'm a contractor for them, technically, right? But, I mean, within the same week, we had a one-on-one with the director, and then the next day, we're briefing to the entire OpCom, I'm not sure what their appropriate name is, but to the entire leadership team of the census. So, and as far as that, being able to have the visibility and an opportunity to address and make a case for this as well has been there. But I think it also, personally, my experience so far has been interacting a lot with the CTO, Avi Bender, who is probably the one that has the most motivation to make this a success, and is really visionary, especially from, at least from my role, it's trying to engage the entrepreneurial community through working with other incubators and being able to bring a new perspective. It's been pretty interesting, and I see the open door there. But I'll let them answer because they're not here and working more directly.
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of echo what Lily mentioned, and I was chatting with Josh before this, and we wanted to be as candid with you all as possible, and hopefully we can edit any necessary footage that we need to. But basically, we have weekly access to the director to basically give updates, and as Lily said, we have a very strong executive sponsor in Avi Bender, who alongside Logan was instrumental in kind of getting the CitySDK hacking off the ground to begin with. So I think we have on multiple fronts folks that are very passionate about this and see the potential, and it's just a matter of helping us kind of take it a step further.
So the other question is the data that you're, first, the other question that you just keep referring to the word API, please tell me you're doing a RESTful API, you're not creating a new.
No, it's RESTful.
You're not creating a one-off API.
It's not SOAP or WSDL.
Thank you. And is the system, in terms of the data that you're providing, replacing an existing portal? Is there a cost offset argument to be had for this, that it's better and more accessible and you can replace some?
No, it's
older?
in addition to.
It's an addition.
Yeah, I would have had a question for you. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what's your current challenge? What you say your director maybe is not as receptive to the idea?
Well, I think, in honesty, the ISO is no longer there. I think that the logjam has broken, and I think actually the administrator at EPA, when she hears about this, is going to be super excited. So I don't. It's not. I think that no one's really briefed her yet, but I think that will happen. But I think executive support is, and I've written best practices. I co-chaired the government link data working group for 3 years. The first thing I say under best practices is get executive support.
Yeah.
So that's really, really critical.
And in bureaucracy, it's sort of the way.
And then do you have managers saying, well, this is an additional cost. How can we justify, since we don't really know when we put this data out there, how many people are using it? Because I presume Census isn't asking for a login to be able to get access to it.
We have about 7,000 keys out there now.
But you do have to get a key.
Yes, you do have a key. It's an automatic email, name, and all that.
But you have to get it so you can monitor who's logging in and asking for what.
Yes, well, to some degree, it's a very high-level view of our traffic. So it's 700 million calls doesn't mean much because I've actually gone in contact with the heaviest callers, and sometimes I think they're just bashing our API just because they're they haven't really optimized their end because they don't have an incentive to. But yeah, we have some metrics around that, and that's a good idea.
And sorry, one last question. Aggregators, I will tell you, we're very nervous about this. Big aggregators. So it's great, we all want to empower the small developer, but the big aggregators don't think this is a cool thing. So I spend quite a bit of, well, some don't, So I spend quite a bit of time saying it's actually a very good thing because you can now be smarter and programmatically get at this data rather than having one or two guys, do a lot of data cleanup and data wrangling with scripts, which a lot of companies have, but then they upsell it for, $50,000 a year to lots and lots of different people. So are you doing anything to work with some of the big aggregators to?
I'm a huge proponent of the little guy. I'm I'm a underdog supporter, and the deepest part of my heart. Like I was watching the Man City Barcelona game today, I was just like, of course they're getting killed. And these guys at the end of the bar are watching, and they're like cheering at their 4-1, and I'm just like, because I don't care who wins. I just want it to be a good game. So yeah, I always support the little guy, but at the same time, we're also having conversations with Google and Microsoft and Amazon and and very large organizations of how we can all partner and make this, available to anybody. I mean, if you want to partner with somebody who's going to help people find your stuff, partner with Google, right? So we're not picking the winners. We just want to make it as easy for everybody to work.
And are you hosting it at a data center that you control?
Yes, we own it. We own that. Well, actually, it's a web of different data.
Contractors presumably operate it, but it's an internal, like the NCC at EPA?
We own all the data. It's on our own servers. It's a web of servers, hence the name data web.
Mm-hmm.
The API is an abstraction on top of that. Rather complex abstraction. Owen, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually was going to ask, I was trying to look around and get some more information on what data sets you guys are using. So I heard Department of the Interior. I assume a bunch of this is ACS data. So what data sets are you currently using? Are you looking at bringing in other localized data sets or other governmental data sets specifically on top of the city framework?
Yeah, so right now, we just started our first sprint last Wednesday, and we've identified that environment would be a great kind of area to work on. And that includes Department of Interior. We'd also like to talk to Ethan and the folks at EPA to see if there's some areas for collaboration there. And then on the housing side, we've already been working a bit with HUD. But to be candid, kind of our first backlog of user stories in our first sprint are fixing kind of core issues with our API. And so we haven't gotten into the matching up of other data sets yet. We envision getting into that shortly. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of hear from you guys what you think would be valuable. So do you have any suggestions or?
I mean, we really like ACS data where I work. I'm Owen Henry, I work at DB&C. We are a more politically focused organization that tries to help encourage civic engagement. So being able to figure out on a county or if possible on a census tract level, like how many people haven't registered to vote is kind of a big thing. So they try and use, a lot of people try and use ACS data for that, not in always the most statistically reliable ways, but we're trying to encourage be better about that. So we love ACS data, but I was curious what other data was in the pipeline beyond that.
We have American Community Survey data with ACS. That's the long form for those who aren't familiar with ACS. The reason why everybody loves ACS, the data, Congress doesn't love it because it's really expensive. And it's actually quite, the questions are quite long. It take about an hour to fill it out. It'll ask you, it asks sometimes controversial questions like whether or not you have a working toilet in your bathroom. So we get a lot of pushback on those questions, but anyway, a lot of people love that survey, the data that provides some of the most popular data sets we have. So that's a big plug for the ACS. If you guys want to take a look, it's incredibly rich. It's like, I think it's like both broad, deep, and rich. It's like a big, gigantic pool of cream in terms of its data density and scale.
Well, I think the other thing too is we have a lot of industry folks like Zillow rely heavily on ACS for like the estimate, and so it's actually a driver for a lot of economic companies that are helping drive the economy forward. So yeah, I concur. It's definitely kind of the cream of data, if you will.
Yeah, the creme de la creme. There's also, of course, we have the Decennial, which is our flagship product. That is the highest resolution product. It's every 10 years, right? But it'll get you down the block, so you can find out, like, what's literally your block, the demographics of the block. It's not as rich. We have the Decennial. We have economic indicators data, which is the nation level. We have county business patterns, county, That's economic data down at the county. We have econ data that's also at the county, but it's a little bit more, it's a little richer. It's like it's a small pool of cream. And then we have current population survey, population estimates. You go to, this is a really easy way to find out. Census.gov/developers. It's all in there, all the information. And that list is going to grow like quite significantly this month. By the end of the month, we're going to be putting four more completely different new data sets within there, but also adding to the vintages of the existing data sets.
And I think what I would add to that is Logan spending a lot of time on understanding kind of like geography use cases. So we're looking at can we provide geography data in formats like GeoJSON and the like, which is quite popular of course for web applications. So that's kind of like that would be kind of a new capability that we're researching and trying to collect feedback on. Would developers find value in that?
We currently have a Geo API, but it dumps out Esri shaped files, which is a proprietary format. So, yes.
Sanjay Jain, part of the Civic Leaders community. You mentioned development administration earlier. Is this all the result of the 2009 executive order to have government move open?
It's not because of that, but it's definitely that has helped open the doors to leadership in terms of its being more salient. Yeah, like it's no longer like you're gonna what's the it's more like just look at the digital government strategy, look at the open government initiative, open government plan. There's all these high level strategies all over the place to kind of tie into, and that's what in government that's what you want to do. You want to tie your strategy into a higher level strategy.
Makes it an easier sell.
Yeah, much easier sell. This is blessed by the people above you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You can please edit that out. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Felio from International Food Policy Research Institute. So I'm coming from the international development world. So there are some organizations like World Bank really are advocating for open data, but most of the people actually working in my field are like economists or very active people. Like they still prefer to communicate through emails using PDFs or Excel file. Like we have been trying really hard to push for API, and we did some like project using API. Firstly, couldn't understand why we need to put so many time and effort in doing this, and then second, by the end of the day, because we are relatively small, so no one is using our data, like no one is using our API. So I'm just wondering, do you have any experience of communicating with non-technical people about open data?
Oh, yeah.
And then how and how do you motivate, like how have been like promoting your API to a larger world?
I'll let Jeff answer this because this is right on his I have a lot of experience with this, but it's right on his radar right now. So.
Yeah, I would look at case studies and examples of success using the data because really in my opinion, what API is allowing is unlocking further potential of the data. Yeah. Like you definitely need PDF, you need Excel, you need existing formats. But if you look at leaders in industry and other folks that have valuable data, they're allowing in some cases new industries to form based on that potential. Yeah. And so kind of showcasing what's possible with the data in either an adjacent market or a similar company that works in the same space that you do, I think is one way that you can kind of help show that potential.
Here's how I sell APIs. I don't know if I'm the only one who uses this analogy, but I came up with it after getting frustrated with not having a way to easily communicate this to a non-technical audience. The way I sell APIs is that the government, and in my context, that's typically the context. In government, we've been a retailer. We've been creating our own little products to deliver data to specific markets in specific formats, right? So we create this application, we have the county business patterns map that delivers the data to this particular audience, we have American Fact Finder does this, we have Quick Facts, we have my congressional district, we have all these little retail stores that are delivering some curated set of our data to specific audience. What an API does is essentially creates a whole warehouse, right? So that anybody, any other entrepreneur, a third party can come and create their own retail store on our data. So we're basically moving it from a retail model to a franchise model. And we're basically creating a franchise of third-party developers. And our role is moving into sort of how do we do from sort of selling things in the window dressing and spending a lot of money doing that, honestly, it's very expensive to be a retailer. Moving upstream from that and saying, okay, how do we partner with people who have much more interest in being and understanding the market, their specific market, and creating tailored solutions for those things, and they're going to do a lot better at it because they're much smaller, they're more agile, they're more responsive. We're very large. It's like gigantic Titanic against all these little pirate ships. I mean, the pirate ships are going to win if it's a matter of agility, right? We're going to win if it's just a matter of perseverance. But we will, of course, still create products for the marginalized customers, people who may not, and we'll be partnering and especially focusing on creating products for people who would otherwise have no recourse. That's why, again, we're very much interested in civic hackers, people who are interested in the passion projects of accommodating typically marginalized consumers and allowing them to access to data. Sometimes it's voter data, sometimes it's how to, like, for grant applications and stuff for small businesses and so on. So strategic partnerships, yes, but really, how do we make that wholesale experience a pleasurable one? How do we make that gate wonderful, shiny golden gates that people are like, oh, I want to go to that warehouse? And that's kind of the way I saw it. I'd say from retail to wholesale.
And that's actually what we've been working on this week. Actually, our developers looking on creating the user interface, basically. For right now, everything's housed in GitHub, but another way to be able to get more users, it's make it easier to make it very friendly. So that's one of the tasks that we're actually working on and tackling it. And being able to provide also interactive documentation is one of the goals that we have. Because that way, if you're not so much of a big developer who's used to going through a bunch of data sets, but you want to explore and you want us to get started, you need to know what's in there. You need to know what's under the hood, right? And you need to get it in a way that's understandable and digestible and friendly. So that's one of the type of problems and that we're considering as well. And that's where we encourage you guys all to go to the GitHub, create your account, start looking at it. If you guys see any specific pain points, start putting it in there, and just please start putting some of your recommendations as well, because we're looking for you guys for validation for as we develop as well.
So, I have two questions. So can I ask either all three of you or the two who are in government to talk a little bit about your individual perspective on supply of data, or is government's role to supply the data and build some sample mashups, or provide data, some sample mashups plus, build whole applications? Where are you on that spectrum?
I'm sorry.
So in other words, some people feel very strongly government should just publish the data, just give us an API and let the free market, small and large, do whatever they're going to do with it. Others feel no, government has sort of special knowledge of data and how maybe data from HUD or the Department of Labor might complement nicely census data to produce something useful. And maybe the smart people at 18F want to dive into that, build some apps. Where do you all sit on that spectrum?
That whole spectrum. That whole spectrum.
I would,
You mentioned building apps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more on the API side. API, but understanding that sometimes the API isn't enough in terms of the user experience, and so that's why, if you look at iOS and other strong platforms, it's not just the interface to the hardware, it's the dev tools, it's documentation, it's kind of the SDK, if you will, on top of that. And so that's why I'm a little bit more towards the app. I think in kind of the edge cases where an app makes sense, I advocate for open source so that it can be leveraged by the community, et cetera. So in some cases, I do think an app will make sense, as long as it's produced in an agile and open source manner, in my opinion.
Thanks.
Quick question on the data.
Take that question.
Oh, you want me to answer? Okay, sorry. Well, I'll help just real quick, and then I'd say that conventionally, traditionally, up until very recently, no organizations have really had APIs. For a decade, private small corporations like Amazon and stuff have been really leading the charge of APIs. The government is, of course, 10 years behind the private sector in general on everything. We're still using Windows 7, and that was recently. We just moved from XP. We just got on, we just got off of Lotus iNotes for our email system. So we're quite, you know, we let everybody else take the risk, right? And then we kind of say, oh, okay, well then we can. There's like everybody else is in the water. There's no, and it's obviously that if there's any sharks, like all these other people are gonna get eaten first, and then we say, okay, I think we can get them. So that's kind of where we are in APIs. It's like the new thing. But you know, I think I agree. I would agree that I think that that's the way that we should go. I mean, we should really spend time to make APIs like our focus, and really partnering is. It should be more of a. Because it's just, again, I think it's very expensive to create products for everybody, and
Well, you
and
can't
we're not
possibly
very-
contemplate what everybody needs, but
Right,
I
and we're not
appreciate
great at that.
And I would say that publishing sample apps and having really good documentation and making it easy so that you can get up and going in 15 minutes is critically important. But I think that will really make the data aggregators unhappy if the government does get into the building of apps, because that's where they feel, and I feel as the head of a small company, that's where we add value.
You can add value, yeah.
We got to, this has got to be the last question, guys. Sorry.
First of all, let me apologize for interrupting. My question was kind of, you're providing all of this data. Is there any way for us, the public, to know that this data is valid?
Data is valid.
Yeah, I mean, how do we know, how do we trust this data? Is there something that we...
We have margins of error. We have a lot of, we have a boatload of methodology documentation. So if you really want to really get into it, it's all there. That's one thing I can say is that I'm not. I would say that the Census Bureau is like this gold standard of statistically valid data. I mean, we have more statisticians per square foot than any other office building in the United States. So. That's not a problem for us in terms of rigor. Actually, sometimes it's a double-edged sword because of that statistical rigor. We have a really hard time showcasing third-party applications because they're like, I don't want to. We don't want our seal of approval on anybody else's application. We can't guarantee that that's rigorously or well curated application. So you can look at the methodology if you're brave. I haven't been, so I don't check too much out of it. Check it out too much.
I was going to tweet that line, but I'll have to do that later.